Hey guys, so today we're making these chocolate cinnamon rolls, gluten-free and dairy-free, and they're really soft and delicious. So the first thing I'm doing here is measuring out. I'm using brown caster sugar. I'm using just like about 5 grams, just a little bit to feed the yeast. I'm just making up my yeast here, and I'm just using a couple tablespoons of milk. I've measured out 200 ml of almond milk and then just using about 2 tablespoons of that and mixing that with the sugar. And then I'm just going to pour in my active dried yeast, which I'm using 9 grams of. And there, I'm just going to mix that up then in a second. And I'll pop that into a warm place to rise for about 15 minutes until it's really, really frothy. I'll see that in a minute. So yeah, making these chocolate cinnamon rolls, they're really delicious and way fluffier and softer than all the other gluten-free cinnamon rolls I've tried. You can just use this recipe minus the cocoa powder, replace it with flour and get rid of the chocolate and make normal cinnamon rolls with it. It's really good too. And yeah, really fluffy. Next, I'm using psyllium husk powder. You can use whole psyllium husk. I think use a little bit more of that, 25% more. So I'm using 13 grams of psyllium husk powder, and I'm mixing that with 180 grams of warm water. I know that's a kettle, but it's not boiling water, it's just warm water. I've left it to cool for a little bit after it had boiled. And then you're going to want to whisk that up really good. You can use a milk frother if you find that it helps you get a better consistency. That's a good way to mix it in. Or you can just use what I'm using, which is a fork. Just make sure you're whisking it in really good and not too many lumps or anything in there. If it's a little bit cooler, it does make it a little bit easier, to be honest. So then I'm just going to leave that on the side again to congeal up a little bit before we add it into our cinnamon rolls. Next, I'm adding my flour. I'm using bread flour, the Dove's Farm gluten-free bread flour, and I'm measuring out 420 grams of the bread flour. Then I'm using 2 teaspoons xanthan gum. Again, I'm using the Dove's Farm one. You can use whatever gluten-free one you want to use. If you want it to be gluten-free, you can make them normal if you like. And then I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder as well. This just makes them a little bit more fluffy. Obviously we've got the yeast, which is our main rise, but this baking powder makes them a little bit more fluffy, and they don't go hard at all the next day if you leave them in a sealed tub. They're really soft again the next day, which again I found was not the case for other gluten-free cinnamon roll recipes that I've tried off of online. I found that they went quite hard the next day. And then I'm adding in the cocoa powder. I'm using 50 grams of cocoa powder, and this is like a dark cocoa powder. To be honest, you probably want to sieve it in. I didn't sieve it in, but you're probably better off if you do sieve it in. But if you're not sieving it in, just make sure you kind of break apart any clumps of the cocoa powder, which is what I did. So I'm just adding that in, and then I'll mix that in and make sure I haven't got any huge clumps of cocoa powder in there. But yeah, if you use a sieve, you don't have to worry so much about the cocoa powder clumps, which is probably better. Yeah, just make sure you're using a dairy-free cocoa powder. If you are very allergic, make sure there's no may contains or anything. That can be quite hard to find though. I'm pretty sure the one I'm using isn't a may contain, and it's a dark cocoa powder, but maybe look online on Amazon if you're struggling to find one. Same with the psyllium husk, it can be really tricky to find. I get mine on Amazon. Because you're only using small quantities, it lasts forever. So you don't have to worry too much about buying it repeatedly, because it is quite pricey, actually. It's like £10 for a bag of 500 grams, but you're only ever using it in quantities like today, like 13 grams. So you can make it without the psyllium husk, but it's much better with it. Then I'm adding in the sugar. Like I said, I'm using golden caster sugar and I'm using 90 grams here. These are very sweet chocolate cinnamon rolls, but you can definitely cut down the sugar if you don't want them to be as sweet. If you want them to be a little bit more plain, definitely cut down on the sugar. And you could use maybe dark chocolate instead of using the milk chocolate chips that we're going to use. Here you can see I'm adding in my psyllium husk, which has like congealed quite nicely, and we'll get that mixed through. And then you can see the yeast is really frothed up. That's the yeast there. I'm just adding that in as well. That's what you want your yeast to look like, so you know it's really good, and really going to create a good rise in your baked goods. I found sometimes it doesn't froth up that well if it's quite cool out, which I'm sure most people will find and know. So if you have a radiator or an airing cupboard, it's great to stick it in there, but if not, it might take a little bit longer to rise. But like I say, I left this for about 15 minutes next to a radiator and it frothed up really well. Again, with your yeast, make sure it's gluten free. Yeast is gluten free, but sometimes the coating they add onto it isn't, so just make sure it is. And again, obviously dairy free when you're checking your ingredients. I'm just trying to get off all the yeast, so we've got all the yeast in our bread product, in our cinnamon rolls, so that it has a really nice rise. And I'm just going to get that into my KitchenAid. You can just use a spoon or a mixer. But yeah, I'm just using my Sun mixer, my KitchenAid. I'm just mixing that all through nicely, making sure there's no lumps of psyllium husk gel or anything like that within the cinnamon bun dough. Okay, once that's all mixed through, I'm adding in my vanilla, not vanilla, this is oil, and I'm using 4 tablespoons of oil. Let me just turn this fan off. So I'm just adding that into the dough, and then I'm going to crack my egg here. I was initially going to crack it straight into the bowl, but I figured it's best not to risk getting eggshell into it, so I cracked it into a separate bowl and then just poured it into the mixer bowl with the rest of the ingredients. I'm just using 1 egg here, and like I said, I use 4 tablespoons of sunflower oil. You could use another oil. You probably want a pretty neutral flavoured oil, so a vegetable oil is good too. I use sunflower oil. Avocado oil immersion is good too. Just washed my hands there after the egg. And then I've got a bag of dairy-free, chocolate chips there. I'm adding half of them in now, and then I'll add in the other half once all the ingredients have kind of mixed together a bit better, so they don't break up I don't want them all to be super broken up within the dough. So I'm just put that on to mix. Like I say, I have my 200 ml of almond milk measured out from before, and that I used a little bit of in the yeast, and I'm just adding that in slowly into the stand mixer as it's mixing, making sure I'm getting to the right consistency. I use the whole 200 ml of the warm almond milk, but you may find that you need more or less, just depending on kind of the temperature and all those things. So I call this almost done. I kind of have a look at it. This is when I remember I haven't added my vanilla or salt, so you'll see in a second I add just a couple of teaspoons of vanilla and a little bit, a pinch or so of salt as well into that. like I said, I'm just adding in all that almond milk. I now have chocolate all over my hands, so I quickly go wash that off. You don't really run the risk of over mixing when it comes to gluten free, because you can't make the gluten develop too much because there isn't any. So you just want it to be well mixed. So that's kind of your aim there. And of course you can knead this by hand, absolutely, that's fine. So yeah, here I'm just adding in a couple pinches of salt, like I say, the rest of my chocolate chips, and some vanilla. So calling that done. It smelled divine, by the way, as I was mixing this. It smelled absolutely delicious. So I'm just going to get that out of the bowl. Get that bit off the dough hook. And then we need to let it rise. So I need to transfer it into a plastic bowl with some oil in it to help it rise, because the metal makes it a bit harder for it to rise, because obviously it steals all the heat. So popping it into a plastic bowl, you could use a wooden bowl or something else as well. I'm just using plastics is what I've got, and a little bit of oil around the edges just to make sure it keeps nice and hydrated. It is very sticky, I must admit. If you put a bit of oil on your hands first, you won't get it so stuck to your hands like I do. So just a bit of advice there, probably put a little bit of oil on your hands before trying to transfer it out the bowl. And obviously you just want to make sure there's no bits of flour or anything around the outside. As you can see, it's nice and sticky. And I'm just trying to get all the extra off my hands. And then I'm just going to roll it in the oil. Keep it nice and oiled up. That makes it a lot easier to handle. As you can see, it's not getting so stuck to my hands anymore because of the oil. And then I'll leave that to rise. I'm going to cover that with some cling film. You can cover it with a kitchen towel too. And I'll leave that to rise. I left it to rise for about 2 hours for the first rise, and then we'll roll it out and let it rise again. You want it to about double in size. Again, it depends how warm your house is and all of that. So if it's quite chilly out, leave it for a little bit longer. As you can see, that's it. Waiting now. Go put it in one place. Here I've mixed 95 grams of soft butter with 100 grams of the golden caster sugar, and I've got about 65 grams of melted chocolate there, and I'm just pouring that into it, and I'm going to mix that up with a little bit of cinnamon, and that'll be our filling. I'm just creating that now, and because of the chocolate and the butter, it stays soft anyway, so I created that straight after making the dough, and then I just left it on the counter and it was fine by the time I got round to add in the filling. But you could make that just before you want to actually use it as well, that's fine. Yeah, I'm using probably about 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, but use as much as you want. It depends if you want it super cinnamony. If you want it really cinnamony, then I would say at least 4 teaspoons. But if you want it less cinnamony, then 2 teaspoons is good. Or you could go with no cinnamon at all if you didn't want cinnamon, if you just wanted the chocolate. I just melted my chocolate in the microwave in the bowl, but you could double boil it too. So once that's all mixed through and looks all yummy, I'm just going to cover that, and like I say, I'm leaving that on the counter for a little bit. Here's the dough after it's risen. As you can see, it's about doubled in size. It's really nice and puffy, and it smells again really good. So I've got that ready, and now we need to roll it out. So I'm just going to put some flour on my surface. I've got a rolling pin and the pan that I'm planning on putting it in ready. I'm just going to spread out the flour. It is quite a sticky dough, so roll your rolling pin in that flour to make sure it doesn't get stuck to the rolling pin, and make sure you've got enough flour for it not to get stuck to the table. If you do put it in the fridge for 10 minutes before you roll it out, it will make it a bit easier to roll out. I didn't do that, but you can do that. So I'm just pouring out my dough here. As you can see, it's nice and large. It rose really well, and yeah, popping some flour all over it to make sure it doesn't stick. In terms of thickness, I'd say you're aiming for about half an inch thickness for the dough to roll that out in. You want kind of a long rectangular shape initially. It doesn't have to be perfect, I wouldn't say. It depends how perfect you want them to look. But I would just aim for quite kind of like a long rectangular shape in terms of the way to make it shaped out when you're rolling it. So obviously you need your filling prepared as well. So once you've got it to the shape that you kind of want it at, then you'll need your filling, which I'm just grabbing, and then just spread it all over it. Make sure you're really getting to the sides of the dough so that all of it is really nicely covered in the filling. And if you didn't want a chocolatey filling, if you just wanted normal cinnamon filling, then I would just do 95 grams butter, 100 grams sugar, and 3 tablespoons of cinnamon. So as you can see, we've got plenty of filling here, so making it really nicely spread out over the dough. I'm really trying to get to the edges. Like I say, mine is not the perfect shape, and that's completely okay. It does mean obviously you'll end up with some bigger and some smaller, but nothing hugely significant. So I'm just trying to get the rest off the spoon, make sure I got as much of the goodness as I can and the tastiness, and then I'm going to roll it up. So I'm going to roll it up from the longer side and then cut it, but you could cut it and then roll it up. That's down to preference. I just like doing it this way more. So kind of making a big log and then cutting it. So just be careful as you're doing this. Obviously you don't want to break it or have any breakages. some of the chocolate chips might come out the dough, you can just replace them in. As you can see, there's a couple of my chocolate chips that have come out, so I'm just repinning them in there, rolling it up. You can see a few more of my chocolate chips. Then I'm just going to put a bit of flour over it, over the area that was sticky, and over my main part of this cinnamon roll, just for when I cut it up. So now you're going to want a relatively sharp knife to cut it up, and your pan that you're going to put them into. So I'm using just a Pyrex, and then I'm oiling up the Pyrex. Just with, you could use butter, I'm just using some oil, rubbing it over it to make sure they don't get too stuck to my Pyrex. And then the easiest way to cut it out would probably be to chop the ends off first, and then cut it into sections. So cut it in half, then cut it in half again, and then cut those bits in half again. That's what I did. Try to put a bit of flour over your knife. Just be careful when you're doing that, but just so that it doesn't get super stuck to the dough. I do cut off the ends. You don't have to cut off the ends though if you want to keep them. And then I'm just laying them out. Again, just chopping off those ends. And then we've got them all in the pan already. And yeah, those are the scraps, so I'm just going to check those. But you can easily just add them to your pan if you want the scraps. You definitely don't need to check them out. And yeah, I'm going to cover those, and then they will rise. I left mine for about 3 hours to rise. Honestly, I had other things going on, and then they had risen beautifully, as you can see. They're nice and puffy. Again, it was quite warm, so they rose really nicely, but depending on the temperature, it depends on how quickly they'll rise. So then I'm just going to pop them in the oven to bake at 200 degrees Celsius for 25 to kind of half an hour, 25 minutes to half an hour. Meanwhile, I'm going to make my cream cheese frosting. I did 100 grams cream cheese. This is the dairy-free Philadelphia cream cheese. Then I'm going to do 100 grams icing sugar and a teaspoon of vanilla. If obviously you don't have a dairy allergy, you can just use normal cream cheese, but this is the dairy-free and gluten-free Philadelphia cream cheese, which is really good. Yeah, there I am, just pouring in the 100 grams of icing sugar. I am doubling the frosting recipe because I like a lot of frosting, but you could do half the amount, definitely. I'm just going to mix them, trying to wipe away the icing sugar there. I'm just going to mix up a little bit with the spoon, just so when I put it on to mix on the mixer, it doesn't go absolutely everywhere. You probably want to take your bowl off the scales when you're mixing, which I didn't do, which is not great because it might ruin my scales and ruin the calibration of them. But now I'm going to pop that into the mixer and get that mixed up. Mixes up, it comes together really quickly, and you can easily get this done while they're baking. done, I take a little taste of it on my spoon. Just quality control. No, just it's very delicious cream cheese icing. Oh, here actually I'm scraping down the sides and just re-putting it on for a second so that it has all that icing sugar incorporated, because it got a bit stuck up the sides because it's just so powdery. And then I just take a little taste of it, and it's delicious. So then once your cinnamon rolls have cooked, they'll look like this, hopefully, nice and delicious. Bubbling still coming out of the oven. And then I'm just going to grab the icing and spread it over. They're really soft. But because obviously on the top they get a little bit crispy from the oven, which is really nice. So obviously we have a generous amount of cream cheese icing here. So just pop in some of that on top. Honestly, you can leave it and it will melt down. You don't really need to spread it, but I do spread it out over it just to make it a bit more even. They smell so good coming out of the oven. Okay, just mixing that all over them. You could also do like a chocolate cream cheese, which would be really nice too if you added a bit of melted chocolate on it, if you wanted to go super, super, super chocolatey. Tasting the cream cheese icing again. As you can see in my shadow, really good. So this is a look at them up close. This is me grabbing one and having a taste of it, just taking it out with a spoon. And they are really tender, so I'm just trying to be careful as I'm getting it out. As you can see, I've kind of broken apart the bottom of it. And got chocolate everywhere, but that's okay. Oh, looks so yummy. And then I'm just going to have a taste of it. And you'll be able to see my reaction in a second. Really good. So do have a go at trying these and let me know how you find them. This is my reaction to it. And here's me just showing you how tender they are. Really, really soft. So I hope you enjoy and let me know if you give them a try.